Okay, today we are welcoming to the Musty Creative Podcast Rebecca Waring Crane. We are so glad and happy to have you on the show. Rebecca is an artist who has lived in Lebanon and in Kenya and in Midwest America. And we are very happy for her as well. She just received her Master's in Fine Arts and Studio Art from the California State University of San Bernardino. So
Woo,
welcome
woo.
to the program, Rebecca.
Thank
And
you.
just to start off the program, we'll start with the question of, how did you get started in teaching in Kenya?
It was accidental. I married the right guy. It sounds kind of, I don't know. I don't know what it sounds like, but that's how it happened. I had finished an undergrad in education back in the day when that's all you needed was a 4-year degree, and got married to this really hot guy, and he was heading overseas. So I went with him. Actually, we spent our first year in Sudan. I wasn't certified. My training wasn't recognized there in Khartoum. Not surprising. But when we transferred to Kenya a year later, I was my certification was recognized, so I could teach school there. And I'm really glad I had that opportunity. It was so different. I had done all my preliminary teacher training in the States, and what a shock to walk into the classroom and every student stands up
Oh, wow. Yeah.
out of a respect. And yeah, it was pretty exciting and very different. I felt myself beginning to speak with a slightly English accent
Nice.
just because I kind of morph to fit into this setting. And I did that for 3 years
Wow.
until we decided, let's have children. So that's what came along then after that.
That's awesome. That's amazing. To go travel to another part of the world, but not just travel and experience kind of the touristy attractions, but you really got to live and be a part of that culture. That's great.
It was. It was such an education, and I don't know that I'd ever want to be a tourist. I like to think of myself as a traveler, but I'm not wild about the things most people go to see, the tourist attractions. They're not that interesting to me. I want to see where the people shop and what locals are interested in doing. I might get a glance at, okay, let's go to Serengeti National Park because we're here. But
Right.
yeah, it really changed so much of my life for me. Marrying this person, living abroad, and being the foreigner. That was really interesting as well. Yeah.
Is that what you were always planning on doing, becoming a teacher, or did you have other plans for yourself?
Tricky question. So, yes, for being a teacher, kind of, sort of. To make it really clear, I was in school in the 80s when I met my husband. I finished school and we got married, but there weren't a lot of careers that were really open for women. And I was not the most out there, boundary breaking, frontier type of person. So you could go into nursing and teaching. Music was an option if you were going to marry a doctor, because then you could have that. But so half and half, Michelle. It was a lucky thing that I turned out to enjoy the classroom and be good at teaching, because that was one of my few options. Didn't plan on going overseas till I met my partner. So that part of it was kind of in the plan, because going back to the time I was coming up when I was raised, I was very much formed by the cultures of my family, and that was to be flexible, to be the person who could be the support, or I was going to be malleable and, I don't know, easy to marry?
Oh,
Heck of a
mercy.
better word. So that it was all about the man's professional career, and then I was the flexible spouse. I could go anywhere gladly. Oh my goodness. That you know what, does not prepare you to settle into a new culture really well, because you might think you're going gladly. Our first year of marriage, and I say this with so much love, was hell. It was just, it was terrible. Not because of who we were, but because we had so little experience and understanding, and we didn't have tools of conversation really to work things through. And the other expatriates, the expats, they were actually the problem. The people in the, in the office where my husband worked, we were just all on, the office was on the main floor and we had apartments above that. And that was extremely stressful. And nothing prepared me for that. No dream I had, because again, I had been told, don't you want to get married and have children? When I spoke out loud of dreams, like, oh, I think I'm bright enough to go to med school, or, oh, I think you can do anything you set your mind to, but don't you want to get married and have children?
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Sideways answer to that. Did I always dream of this? No. I keep adjusting and updating my dreams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting, because I know a lot of women are they are trying to teach their daughters now, you can do anything. Don't focus so much on just being the housewife. Not that that's a bad thing, but because that's a really important job. But I think just to take advantage of the opportunities that we have now as women, and to really make the most of what we can be. I think that's really important. And it's just interesting hearing your perspective on that, of the messages that you were receiving from your family and how that influenced your choices for education and what you were doing as a career.
Yeah, things have definitely changed. I have a daughter of my own now, and our conversations have nothing to do with, well, when's the wedding? Never. She's got so many interesting things going on. Yeah, it's definitely a different time, for which I'm really grateful and mildly resentful, if I'm honest. But at least we got here, and I am very, very happy in this relationship. It's been enduring, and I think one of the main reasons it's been so successful for me is that I'm with somebody who has this incredible capacity to celebrate who I am and be curious to see what's next for me. Who has kept up with all the evolution that I've been through since we said I do. Because who I am now and where I am, as my sister put it the other day, you have traveled galaxies to get from there to here in so many ways. Professionally, spiritually, ideologically, and he's been able to keep up. I feel pretty fortunate.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And just to fast forward a little bit, when I met you, you had started work on a documentary about your life and how you realized that you were sick, and just your journey in discovering what exactly was wrong with you, and how your family was helping you get through that, and how your husband was there for you. I was just wondering if you can sort of tell that story, because I think it's really interesting, and it's really amazing how this sickness that you were experiencing actually translated into art.
Wow, that's right. That's how we met. So one of the things that I didn't exactly take for granted, but I didn't get distracted by, is that for most of my life, I have enjoyed vigorous, robust health. And my body generally does what I want it to do. But things started going really strangely. Boy, how long ago was this now? About 8 years ago, when small things weren't simple. Like, it was the fall, and we made our first fire. I like to build fire, and I couldn't blow to fan the flame. I couldn't purse my lips, and that was strange. And I was swimming. I love to swim. And I'd do the first half-mile breaststroke, and I don't worry about goggles. I actually got my head above the water, which kind of whatever, but I couldn't close my own eyes. And I would tire quickly, which wasn't what I was used to. When I would swim on my back, I couldn't keep my head above water. My neck just flopped. That was weird. I remember getting to the side of the pool and just weeping because I didn't know what was going on. Then my voice started to change a little bit, and I had trouble. I could either eat or I could talk, but I couldn't go to lunch with friends and do both. It became difficult to swallow water.
Oh, wow.
I was blogging, and I couldn't type properly. I was down to index fingers because my fingers, there was no pain. They just didn't respond. They just sort of... Bleh. Even with simple things like washing my face, I couldn't control my own hands. And while it was so weird and rather frightening, part of me thought, this will pass. And it took me a while to finally reach out to my regular physician, and what do you know? It had been 4 years since my last checkup. I guess I was overdue.
Yeah.
And I went in with a list of all these things that I was worried about, and I just sat in her exam room crying when I finally named everything out loud that wasn't working properly. It was so sobering, and I love my primary care physician. I have seen her recently. And she came back into the exam room with a printout, and she said, this isn't a diagnosis, but we want to rule this out. And she handed me a stack from a medical website, and it was all about ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Really?
Well, people don't come back from that.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was super sobering. But it wasn't a diagnosis, so I couldn't really jump into anything, and I wasn't ready to. My husband was amazing. You know, he took his cues from me. He's not a reactive person. He's always sort of tracking what's happening, and you know, if I'm distressed, okay, yes, he'll look around and like, okay, I see what's the problem. But if I'm kind of keeping a lid on it, which I did, he's like, okay, that's how we'll navigate this. And about 2 weeks, we lived with that possibility. And I had to start thinking, all right, I've had a good run. My life is pretty amazing. I have vibrant relationships with our kids, and I love my husband. You know, maybe this is it. I'm going to start saying goodbye.
Oh, wow.
But
that is very sobering.
Yeah. I did not tell many people because I didn't know what I was going to tell them, and also didn't want to have to keep too many people up to date. I just didn't have the bandwidth for that. So my regular physician kept doing tests. She did send me to a specialist who said, good news, it's not MS. But I didn't even know that had been on the table. I think that was that particular doctor's specialty. But it was my primary physician. She kept having me come in for different tests, and she was the one. And I was there. She had even sent me to an ear, nose, and throat specialist to figure out maybe there was something happening, why I couldn't swallow.
Yeah.
She found me at that appointment because she had called the house to say, I know the results. And my husband said, oh, she's over in the clinic. And she walked in, told me it's not ALS, it's something. At the time, I didn't know what that something was. I'm like, she says, you're going to live.
Yeah. Oh, that must be amazing news.
Yeah, I feel it even now. She just took 2 steps across the room and hugged me so tightly. Just, the relief. And then, okay, now I know what this thing is. It's called myasthenia gravis. It's an autoimmune condition. It's somewhat rare, and I'm an outlier. It happens, it presents in women 20 or 30, or men 50 to 60. Well, I'm neither of those, it was sort of a cross match of the demographic. But when Michelle and I started our conversation, I was moving through the possibility of either taking steroids, really high doses, for the rest of my life, knowing the way that would damage my body but keep me functioning, or the possibility of a surgery. And I had gotten two opinions. I did my research, and that's when I reached out to Michelle, because while the diagnosis originally had been scary than a relief, surgery was a sure thing. I knew this would be a big deal, and I didn't know what it would mean to have my body opened up. So do you guys really want to know all the details?
Yeah. This is good. This is good. I'm drawn into the story.
The surgery removes the thymus gland. I had never heard of it, so if you haven't, don't feel badly. That's perched right under your sternum and above your heart, over your heart. So the surgery is sort of like heart surgery in that the same incision is made, the sternum is cut and opened, and then this little gland that helps us when we're children, but kind of goes into sort of hibernation as we get older. That's where it sits, and I'm not even sure why, but removing this has an impact. It has a difference. So the fear of surgery had me thinking I needed a shield, and the shield I have is art and storytelling and documenting, because suddenly I'm not passive. I have agency. I can craft this. I can decide some of what's happening to me and how it's framed. And so I asked Carrie, a mutual friend, to help me document what was going on. I reached out to women who are artists. We went and did a photo shoot out in Joshua Tree for a before surgery. One of them actually came to the hospital, took pictures right after surgery, and then we had a follow-up again later. So it made things manageable. It made frightening things less frightening, because I was so intentional about showing up in the middle of my own lived experience and doing what I could to shape and direct my story when so much of it really felt out of control.
When you're starting to express all of your emotions through art, how did it become sort of a healing process for you? Like, what types of artwork did you create, and what kind of stories were you telling through that art?
Well, immediately for the project with surgery, it was a very two-dimensional, in a sense that photographs and video were the main medium. But I have to tell you, I'm something of a material, I don't know, junkie, or I'm very promiscuous when I try things. At making, I'm seduced by materials so easily. I want to try, here's cardboard, or here's clay, and here's glass, and here's wood. I try it all, and I found out in grad school, when people say, what's your medium? I couldn't choose, and I realized, you know what? Story is the medium.
Right.
Then I decide what can tell the story the best for whatever it is I want to talk about. So, yeah, the art is a great form of expression, and yes, I love to write, but sometimes words just don't do the thing. They don't always get us completely there, and making something that takes up space. I ended up being a sculptor installation artist. And I love this unwieldy, unpredictable, kind of just whole body experience of turning something that I find into something that I wanted to say, making these visual stories, making three-dimensional narratives, so that I've said what I want to, but now you can look at it, you can see it, hopefully walk around it in space, when we're past the pandemic,
right,
and relate to it in a meaningful way to you, that my story and your story overlap. I've come to believe, and this isn't my original thought, I think this was Carl Rogers, the psychologist, who said, what is most personal is most universal. And I think I trust that.
Yeah. And when you say studio installation artist, can you explain, or a sculptor, you said sculptor installation artist. I think most people know like sculpting, taking like marble or some form of clay and molding into something. But then what's the installation part? What does that mean together?
Glad you asked. And I sculpt with all sorts of things. So when it comes to installation, when I got to my graduate thesis, I had the lovely privilege of doing a solo exhibit, which meant I could fill a space myself with just my work. And that means amazing things. So one of my largest, most ambitious pieces, although, well, I have several very ambitious pieces, would be what we call an installation. So I cast over 60 solid glass pill bottles, thinking of how much medication has managed to keep me alive. Thankfully, since surgery, I'm not taking steroids, but I still take meds every day, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I cast these solid pill bottles, built light boxes, and mounted the light boxes on the wall, and then put these bottles strewn on the top, lit them from below. So now they're suddenly elevated. They have become art, even though often we, pill bottles, we just chuck them and throw them away. So that doesn't fall into sculpture in the usual way. That's more of an installation. Another piece I made was based on a childhood memory. I constructed a swing, just an ordinary A-frame, 2 A-frames, a cross piece, and it's 10.5 feet tall. And the swing hangs from chains, but the swing itself is made out of unexpected layers. Yes, there's a wooden seat, top and bottom, but between that, I have a layer of cast glass and a layer of cast soap, and I have pink insulation and cardboard and a cotton sort of fuzzy sheet. So that's what installation means to me. I mean, there's all kinds of definitions, and I'm happy to try them all, but that's something I've done.
So it's cool. It's like, so taking a space and really filling it with like an artist's expression, but something you could see and maybe even feel to a certain degree.
Absolutely. There's the tone I was after, the feeling or the mood I wanted to create was with this particular show. And by the way, title of the show, Stories I'm Telling Myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's awesome. That's a great title.
I wanted it to feel just a little creepy, a little awkward, mind your step. What's out of place? Something's wrong here. The way I felt as a kid. I had a huge mirror on the floor with drinking glasses all over it. A mirror on the floor? That's kind of, what's that about? I had a found chair for which I cast my right arm in bronze. And the chair had two of its original legs and then the right arm. And the piece is entitled Mom. So, this idea that there's someone who gives her right arm to hold everything in place, and what that whole narrative could mean. Yeah,
Right.
you
Oh,
create
wow.
a feeling with the pieces all together. They all say something individually, and then collectively they tell an interesting story based on childhood memories.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I remember going into art museums as a kid, I never really understood the story that art pieces were telling. I was always like, oh, that looks funny, or that looks weird, or that looks pretty. Like, I just took it at like face value. But then as I got older and I was visiting art galleries and stuff, I would just sit and look at it. And when you really just take the time to look at something and just start thinking about life and your own experiences, I think what you were saying was true of how stories overlap with each other. And whatever this artist is saying, it's somehow talking to you and you're connecting it with something that you went through personally. And so I think it's really interesting how just creating art like that can actually tell a story, even though it's not speaking, it is still speaking in a way, but in more of like just a different vibration, I guess, a different feeling.
That's a good word, different vibration. Yeah. Yeah, that's the hope. The idea is that people come and see the work and feel something, whatever that might be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know when I got to visit your installation and your solo exhibit was really amazing. I think it really helped me to understand what it means to love your body, even though it might not look the way you want it to. Because I know now, because of the surgery, it did leave you with a scar. And so you were really highlighting that. And I thought it was really interesting because a lot of times when we don't like something particularly about our bodies, we try to hide it as much as we can. But you're over here putting it up on like the spotlight and saying like, look, this is what I look like. And I just thought that was so like counterintuitive to what we're taught. Especially as women, it's like you're supposed to hide all the imperfections. You're supposed to put makeup on to like cover yourself, and you were just doing the complete opposite. And I thought that must have been really empowering for you to just own it and like, this is me, this is what I look like now, and it's okay. Like there's no standard that we need to reach as people, like visually, to make ourselves beautiful, because we are already beautiful as we are. So I thought that was really awesome. I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you. Yeah, that show where we played the video that you put together so beautifully, the Body Catalog project, that one, that was much earlier in my graduate experience. That was the first year. And thank you for coming, and I appreciate what you're observing. Yeah, we as a culture, I think, have so many hang-ups around bodies, and I'm a woman of a certain age. I get it, There's just this really narrow place of what it's acceptable to be comfortable with, and I fall outside of that. But you know what? Most of us do. Yeah.
That's really awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about just going through this art experience that you have, getting your degree? Has it helped you in a way to feel more empowered in the way that you tell stories and how you find different stories you can tell?
Boy, that's a good question. Yes. More empowered in the way I tell stories. I absolutely say yes to that. I feel much more confident about my voice and the value of speaking out and telling stories and telling my story. I think whenever anyone is brave enough to talk about, like you were saying, just the no makeup, the here I am, here's the scar, that when we're brave enough to step out and say, here's what it's like, or here's who I am, and here's what I experienced, someone else will feel less alone. And I think that in itself is so powerful and worthwhile. So yes, art school helped a lot. First, it took me apart. They deconstruct you, and you question and doubt, and you worry about everything. And the group crits are fabulous and also really hard and painful. But people are there to pay attention and ask hard questions. In the end, that turned out to be very helpful for me. And my committee chair was so an empowered woman and so blunt in the sense that she finally said, when I got close to my thesis, now it's time to turn down the volume on everyone else, put up your filters, and trust your intuition, because I was taking it all in. I was receiving it and like, okay, I have to rethink this, and oh, that's a good perspective. Maybe I should include this in my piece, and well, what do I do about that? She said, just trust yourself. Trust your instinct, trust your intuition. And that paid off in so many ways because of the focus I found for that last exhibit, Stories I'm Telling Myself. She really helped, and she, even though she's also a visual artist, she knew my penchant for words, for writing things down, and she said, Rebecca, do you want a prompt? Because I was all over the map with my show. Again, too many materials, too much love of everything. I said, yes, please, a prompt. And she said, sit down and write 5 questions or 5 statements that you want your show to make, or that you want to make. And then only put in the pieces that address these. Wow. Brilliant. Focus, clarity. That's continued to stick with me. What is it I want to say with this piece of work, with this project? So yeah, Michelle, I am really excited and clear about the value of storytelling and my past, this permission that we have as people to share what we've been through, and then to listen to each other's stories if we'll just slow down. It's fabulous.
That's really cool. I was wondering if you could tell us about your latest project that you're doing in your own neighborhood. You've been telling stories of others, which I think is really cool. If you want to describe what that's like in the process of that.
Oh, I'm so happy you asked. That's a definite segue from what I was just saying, too. Yeah, so telling my story, I decided I need a little break from my own interior life and reflection, but I wasn't sure when I finished what to do. And because I finished my degree during shutdown, everything went online, everything shifted, everything slowed down. For some people, it's sped up. And the project I'm working on now, called Who is My Neighbor, happened sort of accidentally. It's, again, trusting intuition. It was October in 2020, so we're well into the shutdown. We're well into all the craziness that was that year. And I got an incredibly painful bout of sciatica that knocked me down. I mean, literally, the pain was so bad I blacked out.
Oh, wow.
Thankfully, my husband was close by. He kind of broke the fall. He wasn't quick enough quite to catch me, but nothing got broken on the way down. And I was incapacitated, and it flared up a few times, and I had to be so careful. The first day I could just crawl. Finally I got back on my feet, and I did a lap around our garden. And the thing would flare up, and I'd be on my back again. Thankfully my sister's a PT. That helped, and she iced me, and we did things. And when I could walk outside the front door, I made real tentative steps, and people came out, and they were curious, and they were kind, and I've lived on this street for 12 years, but I've been busy raising kids and then off to grad school, and I know who some of my neighbors are, but I don't know them. But that kindness and curiosity sat with me when someone almost rushed out who I didn't even know. What happened? Are you okay?
Oh.
It's just sciatica. I'm so glad. I thought it was a stroke, she said. I'm like, yeah, I guess that would be scary. And the fact that they noticed me, that they're paying attention, because I go out for my walk. I do 4 or 5 miles a day. I'm on it. I'm brisk. And clearly, I'm now just barely making my way up and down the block. I thought, wow, I don't really know my neighbors. And that's how the project evolved. I started a fresh sketchbook and some notes and ideas, and pretty quickly came up with what it was I could ask to get to know them better that wouldn't feel intrusive.
Yeah.
Thankfully, this guy I married way back when, this really hot academic, is a sociologist and an ethnographer. So we've had conversations about his work for a long time, and I know that influenced me and was percolating at the back of my mind. And I'm asking my neighbors 2 questions, but first I have to meet them. I like living alone in my studio, working on my little projects and reading and walking by myself. I'm energized by my alone time. So just the hurdle of saying hello,
Yeah.
with a little bit more in mind was a stretch. But say hello, introduce myself if we haven't already met. If they're open, talk about my project and ask them, would you like to help me? I'm an artist. May I interview you? Everyone I've asked so far has said yes. And I ask them to tell me 2 stories. Tell me the story about moving into your house.
Oh, that's a good question.
And they can go wherever they want with that, right? They can tell me as much or as little, be as factual, or as long-winded as they want. And then tell me the story of life in your house in 2020. I tell you.
Oh, quick question.
Yeah.
You said your husband is a sociologist and a iconographer. Is that correct?
Oh, good question. Ethnographer.
Yeah.
So ethnography is more interested with story than with data. Data can come out of that, but it's people's lived experiences and their stories that matter to ethnographers. Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of cool.
Oh, okay. That is very cool. And when you say sociology, is that the study of? I always forget. I took only one course in college. What is that the study of? I always forget that.
You know what? I'm sure I should know this. I just
Oh,
take it for
yeah, I'm
granted.
sorry.
It's not my field.
Yeah.
It's not anthropology, but he
Right.
calls himself a social anthropologist. Yeah, just the way we behave as creatures in a social world, and we are all social. So it's pretty broad. It's exciting and interesting, but sorry I can't help you there.
No, that's totally fine. But it's amazing that everyone has been just so supportive and so engaging. And you said there was a couple stories, and obviously you can't share it yet, but there's a couple stories where people would just share with you things were like, oh wow, like I didn't expect that.
Almost every time. And I can share, and I'm already writing because I try to keep, I can only hold so much at once. So I record the interview, I transcribe it, and then I break it down into those 2 prompts. I publish the first and I publish the second. Then I talk to the next neighbor. And the things that come up are incredible. Julio, who has actually now moved to California to get away from gang activity.
Oh, wow.
In New York City. And he did time at Rikers Island before he moved to leave that life. It was just an amazing story he told me. And I just interviewed my neighbors, Joe and Esther, and in the course of things found out he's a heart transplant patient. So the whole thing with COVID takes a completely different perspective when you've been through that kind of an experience.
Yeah.
My neighbor Susan was a young mom. She was widowed at, I think she said 20. And when her daughter was 6 or 7, she bought the house on this street and moved in here as a single mom.
Wow.
Back in the early 80s. And yeah, everyone's got a story. My neighbor next door, Marianne, I'm going to talk to her next. I know that she and her family immigrated from Hungary when she was a teenager. So just very interesting, very different stories. I'm going to be talking to Lido, who has the most beautiful garden. And yeah, people are kind and generous. I talked to Jess across the street. She moved here when she was 14 and now she's 22, and she showed me her artwork, and she talked about what it's like to see the stress of shutdown, because they're being very careful and vigilant in their family, and what it means to live in close quarters as a 22-year-old with your other siblings, a parent. People open up, people are generous, and I realize sometimes I feel slightly a little embarrassed about the project on my end, because they do all the talking. I just gather the story and then edit it and rewrite it. I use a lot of direct quotes, but finally the penny dropped and I realized, oh, but wait, this thing that I do is an art practice. It's a socially engaged art practice with a very high relational aesthetic. And what makes it unique is this collaboration between me and my neighbors. They might not tell the story this way to anyone else. They may not tell the story at all, except that I ask. So I got over my embarrassment thinking, oh, this isn't all my original material. It's really them, and I'm starting to own, like, okay, yes, I get to narrate the story and frame it and be, I hope, as kind and as gentle with them as they have been by talking to me.
Yeah. But it's great because through your experience in like I said, transcribing and narrating the story and framing it, you're presenting it to the rest of us so we can enjoy those stories too. And that's beautiful, and that is art. So that's awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Well, that is my hope, that more people will stumble across the work, that they'll see it. I share it with my neighbors so they know what I've said, what part of the conversation I put forward. But yeah, that is definitely the hope, that there's a wider audience for this kind of very quiet, very personal, hyper-local work, when the next news cycle is going to make us overwhelmed and take us to the tragedies and stories about which we can very often do little.
Yeah.
But we can all talk to our neighbors.
Yeah. And I love that you said too, the hyper-local part always gets me excited. I don't know if it's because I'm maybe maturing or getting older, but it's fun to get to the online newspapers that are hyper local to my area in the OC, to see like what's coming up, what are the trends, or just talking to my neighbors and getting their feel about things. Because sometimes the mainstream news and the widespread global news, network industry that's always rotating 24/7, it gets you hyper focused and engaged on things that you don't have too much control or power or influence in. So you kind of get paranoid about things that really can't affect you, or you can't affect it that much.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's maybe unconsciously that was part of what prompted this project too. I don't wish to walk through life feeling helpless, or that I haven't made a difference, or that we're going to hell in a handbasket and la-di-da, So it's a small and steady act of rebellion and resistance to polarization and the outright hate that happens everywhere. And another thing about those prompts is they're apolitical.
Yes.
I want to build some common ground and sense of connection, and give my neighbors two gifts that I think are so powerful that we all long for, we all crave so deeply, and that is to be really seen and to be deeply heard. Yeah.
I think it does help to get rid of the polarization. It just humanizes people. Because I know when you see someone as a stranger, there's like an automatic wall that's put up. And so when you can really have a conversation with somebody, you really do break down those walls, and you start connecting in different ways that you wouldn't expect. And you're like, oh, I'm kind of similar in that way, or like I didn't think of something that way before. So I think it's really cool that you're just getting to know your community, and you're actually doing more than just getting to know them. You're actually creating art with them.
Yeah.
Which is something that a lot of people haven't done. So I think that's really awesome, and I think you should definitely keep doing that and keep sharing their stories.
What has this project done for building community even more so with your street?
Well, I'm on a text thread with a couple of people who are just looking out for each other. Like when the tree trimmers come by, I got a great text from one of my neighbors, and the first person I interviewed, when I sent him the links to say, hey, here's your story, Mike, he sent back and he said, oh, by the way, 2020, because that was the question. He said, we found out we're expecting, and he sent me a picture of their birth announcement.
Aww.
So
wow.
There are these interesting things now, because I've been in this conversation with them, that I feel more connected. I think I'm already just this open and warm person, but you know what? I have a lot I can learn from my neighbors, and I have a great capacity for engagement and connection. I have a greater capacity, I think, than I gave myself credit for. And I'm also starting to realize how many of them are already talking to each other. I'm thinking a little bit self-righteously, well, I'm going to introduce them to each other. I'm going to help them know each other better. Well, what a silly, asinine thing. They know each other. They're already talking. Not everybody on the street. I've got 16 houses, including mine.
Right.
But I see people differently, and I believe they see me differently. I'm hoping they see each other differently as they read stories that aren't just about them. That's my hope. I don't know yet. I haven't done the follow-up on that.
That's cool. We'll be looking forward to that. And you're distributing these stories on a blog?
I am.
Is there a URL? Or
there
what would
is.
be the URL
So
for that?
I have a website, RebeccaWaringCrane.com, and all of these go on the daybook.
Okay.
So when you
Awesome.
find that site, I've got collections and different things there. But yes, these writings are available. I'd be thrilled to have a few more people read and find them engaging and helpful, or just perhaps an invitation. I mean, a lot of my entries I end by saying, take it. Whatever you see here that you might use, if you want to use the prompts, if you want to use the approach, which is super basic, say hello.
Yeah.
Go ahead and take it. Use this. I don't feel at all protective or proprietary about any of this. I would love to see more neighbors talking with each other.
No, definitely agreed. And we can definitely help. Musty Collective community. We can retweet and like and share and definitely post about these stories. But we're getting to the end of our interview. It's been such a wonderful time talking with you, Rebecca. But we do have one more question, and we love asking this question. So what, obviously you're working on this project, but what story are you dying to tell? Is there anything else that you would still like to create and collaborate on to present to the world?
There are several stories, and thank you for asking. One of them is another hyper-local story. This is definitely off my hyper-local as far as my street interest goes, but there's a group called the Inlandia Institute, and occasionally they put out a book, and the one I'm thinking of is entitled While We Are Here, We Should Just Sing. I think it would make a brilliant miniseries. Women back, I think in the 70s, a group of women were taking guitar lessons.
Okay.
And they said to their instructor, what do you think? Should we form our own group, our own band? And he said, why not? And so they called themselves the Why Nots. And they sang folk songs, but they lived here in Riverside, very different women in some ways as far as areas of influence, I think, and some of them, kind of homogenous too, but the book about them and their history, because now they're up in their 80s, the remaining members. But I thought, man, what a great biopic. And then just, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the music and the different ways they got together. I actually got to one of their, I think they called it a hootenanny or something. One of the last ones they had, it was hot as heck. And the friend who invited me, like, we should sing too. And so we got together a group. But I thought, this is a really interesting story. All the history these women observed, not just in our town, but culturally. I think that would be a pretty sweet, really interesting story to make into maybe a mini series or something. Just saying.
Yeah.
Wink,
that'd be
wink.
cool.
That sounds really cool.
And you said the book is While We Are Here, We Will Sing?
While we are here, we should just sing.
We should just sing. I like that. I mean, while we are here, we're live, right? So, I love that. That's awesome.
So that's just one. And there's more, but that's enough for now.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we look forward to that. And again, we thank you so much, Rebecca, for being on the Musty Creative Podcast. Musty Collective, go out there to RebeccaWaringCrane.com. I have that correct?
Yes, you do.
Awesome. And definitely support her work. And Rebecca, we can't wait to have you on the podcast when that is premiered on Netflix in a couple of years. With you as the producer.
I'm dropping the hint for Michelle. Michelle, make that movie.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you both.